What if the very traits that make a woman intelligent, perceptive, and emotionally aware are the same traits that make her vulnerable to the wrong kind of man? At first glance, it makes no sense. Intelligence should protect, awareness should filter danger, emotional depth should create stronger, healthier bonds. And yet, across cultures, studies, and real life patterns, a strange paradox keeps repeating itself. Highly intelligent women, women who are capable, reflective, and deeply insightful, often find themselves drawn toward men who are emotionally unavailable, manipulative, or even toxic. This isn't a coincidence, and it isn't weakness. It's a pattern rooted in psychology, neuroscience, and the way human attraction actually works beneath the surface. Research in behavioral psychology has shown that attraction is not purely rational. In fact, it is often driven by unconscious reward systems in the brain. The human mind is wired to seek stimulation, novelty, and emotional intensity. And toxic individuals, by their very nature, create unpredictable emotional environments. They are charming one moment, distant the next. Warm today, cold tomorrow. This inconsistency triggers what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, a powerful conditioning mechanism also seen in gambling addiction. When affection is given unpredictably, the brain releases dopamine in spikes rather than steady flows. And these spikes are far more addictive. Studies from neuroscience labs have demonstrated that unpredictable rewards activate the brain's reward circuitry more intensely than consistent ones. In simple terms, the less stable the affection, the more psychologically gripping it becomes. Now consider the intelligent woman. She is not passive. She observes patterns. She seeks meaning. When she encounters inconsistency, she doesn't immediately walk away. Instead, she tries to understand it. She analyzes behavior. She looks for hidden layers. She asks herself what's really going on beneath the surface. And this is where the trap begins. Because toxic men often present themselves as complex puzzles. They are not straightforward. They carry emotional contradictions. They hint at depth, pain, or a hidden story. And to a mind that is wired to explore, to decode, to understand, this becomes incredibly compelling. A study published in Personality and Social Psychology Research found that people who score high in cognitive empathy, the ability to understand others' emotions, are more likely to stay in difficult or imbalanced relationships. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because they believe they can see something others cannot. They believe there is a version of this person that can be reached, healed, or unlocked. Intelligence, in this context, doesn't act as a shield. It acts as a magnifier. It deepens emotional investment. It fuels curiosity. It creates a narrative that says, there must be a reason behind this behavior. And toxic individuals thrive in that narrative. They rarely present themselves as obviously harmful at the beginning. Instead, they create what researchers call love bombing, an intense phase of attention, validation, and emotional connection. This early stage floods the brain with oxytocin and dopamine, creating a powerful emotional imprint. When the behavior later shifts, the mind doesn't immediately linger. Instead, it tries to return to that initial high. For an intelligent woman, this becomes a problem of logic. If something once felt real, meaningful, and deep, then the sudden change must have an explanation. And if there is an explanation, then perhaps it can be solved. But not all problems are meant to be solved. Some are designed to keep you searching. And the more you search, the deeper you fall. This is where intelligence becomes entangled with emotional investment, creating a loop that is incredibly difficult to break. Not because she doesn't see the red flags, but because she sees too much meaning behind them. And that meaning keeps her there longer than she ever intended. There is a moment in every toxic relationship that is almost invisible from the outside, but profoundly powerful from within. It is the moment when understanding quietly turns into attachment. At the beginning, the intelligent woman is simply observing. She notices inconsistencies. She senses emotional distance. She picks up on subtle shifts in tone, energy, and behavior. But instead of reacting impulsively, she does what she has always done best. She thinks, she reflects, she tries to understand. And this is where something critical happens. The human brain does not separate analysis from emotion as cleanly as we believe. The more time we spend thinking about someone, the more emotionally invested we become in them. Neuroscientific studies have shown that repeated cognitive focus on a person strengthens neural pathways associated with attachment. In other words, the more you try to figure someone out, the more your brain begins to treat them as important. So, what begins as curiosity slowly transforms into connection. This is especially true for individuals with high levels of emotional intelligence. They are skilled at perspective taking. They can imagine what others are feeling, even when those feelings are not clearly expressed. They can see pain behind silence, insecurity behind arrogance, fear behind withdrawal. And when they see that, they don't walk away. They lean in. Because to them, this is not just a difficult person, this is a misunderstood one. Psychologists often refer to this as the rescuer dynamic, a pattern where one partner unconsciously takes on the role of healer or fixer. It is not about control, it is about meaning. Helping someone grow, change, or heal creates a deep sense of purpose. And for intelligent individuals who seek depth in relationships, purpose is incredibly attractive. But toxic individuals exploit this dynamic, often without even being fully aware of it. They reveal just enough vulnerability to trigger empathy, but not enough to create real change. They share fragments of their past, hints of their struggles, glimpses of their pain, and each fragment becomes another piece of a puzzle that feels worth solving. The intelligent woman tells herself a story, not consciously, but internally. A story that says this person is not who they appear to be on the surface, that beneath the inconsistency there is something real, something valuable, something worth staying for. And once that story takes hold, it becomes very difficult to let go, because leaving would mean abandoning not just the person, but the version of them she believes could exist. Research in relationship psychology has shown that people are more likely to stay in unhealthy dynamics when they are attached to potential rather than reality. The brain holds on to imagined outcomes with surprising strength, often stronger than it responds to present evidence. This is why people stay in situations that clearly do not serve them, not because they are blind, but because they are hopeful. Hope, in this context, becomes a double-edged sword. It keeps the connection alive, but it also delays the truth. And the truth is often much simpler than the story. Toxic patterns are rarely hidden beneath layers of complexity. They are consistent, even when the behavior is not. The inconsistency itself is the pattern. But recognizing that requires a shift that is emotionally difficult. It requires letting go of interpretation and facing reality as it is, not as it could be. For an intelligent woman, this is one of the hardest transitions to make, because she is used to looking deeper. She is used to finding meaning where others see chaos. She is used to believing that if something doesn't make sense yet, it just hasn't been understood fully. And most of the time, that belief serves her well. But in this case, it becomes the very thing that keeps her stuck, because not every person is a mystery waiting to be solved. Some are simply repeating patterns they have no intention of changing. And the longer you try to understand them, the more you risk losing clarity about yourself. There is a reason toxic relationships feel intense in a way that healthy ones often do not, at least in the beginning. It is not because they are deeper. It is because they are chemically louder. Inside the brain, attraction is not just emotional. It is biochemical. When a relationship is stable, predictable, and secure, the body produces a steady balance of oxytocin and serotonin. These are the chemicals associated with trust, bonding, and long-term well-being. They create calm. They create safety. They create something that feels like peace. But peace is quiet. And the human brain, especially one that is highly active and constantly seeking stimulation, does not always interpret quiet as exciting. Toxic relationships operate on a completely different chemical pattern. They are driven by dopamine spikes and cortisol surges. Dopamine is associated with reward and anticipation, while cortisol is linked to stress and uncertainty. Together, they create a state of heightened emotional arousal. This combination feels powerful. It feels consuming. It feels like something that must be important because it is so intense. But intensity is not the same as depth. Studies in affective neuroscience have shown that emotional volatility increases perceived attachment. When emotions fluctuate rapidly between highs and lows, the brain becomes more engaged. It pays more attention. It assigns more significance to the relationship. This is why arguments followed by reconciliation can feel so bonding, even when they are part of a destructive cycle. For intelligent women, this becomes particularly complex because they are not just feeling the intensity, They are also interpreting it. They may label the emotional highs as passion, the unpredictability as complexity, the emotional distance as independence. They construct narratives that elevate the experience, giving it a sense of uniqueness or rarity. It feels different from ordinary relationships, and that difference is often mistaken for something special. But what feels rare is not always what is healthy. Toxic individuals often create an illusion of depth by revealing selective vulnerability. They might share something deeply personal at unexpected moments, creating a sudden sense of closeness. Then, just as quickly, they withdraw. This push and pull dynamic keeps the emotional stakes high and the other person constantly engaged. The intelligent mind tries to map this pattern. It tries to understand the rhythm. It tries to predict what comes next. And in doing so, it becomes even more involved. This is similar to what psychologists describe in cognitive load theory. The more mentally demanding a task is, the more attention it consumes. And when a relationship becomes mentally demanding, it begins to occupy more psychological space. You think about it more, you analyze it more, you replay conversations, you search for meaning in small details. The relationship starts to feel significant not because of what it consistently gives you, but because of how much of your mind it occupies. And this is where the illusion deepens, because the brain begins to confuse effort with value. If you've invested so much time thinking, feeling, and trying to understand, then it must be important. It must be meaningful. It must be worth it. But that is not always true. Sometimes the effort is not a sign of value. It is a sign of confusion. Healthy relationships, while not lacking in depth, do not require constant decoding. They are not puzzles that demand endless interpretation. They are clear, even when they are complex. They do not rely on emotional instability to maintain interest. Yet to someone who is used to intensity, clarity can feel unfamiliar, even boring. And this is one of the most overlooked reasons intelligent women stay in toxic dynamics. Not because they cannot recognize the problem, but because the alternative feels emotionally underwhelming at first. The absence of chaos feels like the absence of connection, but that perception is shaped by conditioning, not truth. Over time, if the pattern continues, the nervous system adapts to this heightened state. It begins to expect unpredictability. It begins to associate love with emotional swings. And anything outside of that pattern starts to feel less engaging, even if it is healthier. This is how the cycle sustains itself, not through ignorance, but through adaptation. And breaking that cycle requires more than awareness. It requires rewiring what the mind has learned to associate with love. At some point, the question is no longer why this happens, but how it stops. Because awareness alone, as powerful as it is, does not automatically break emotional patterns. You can understand everything about a toxic dynamic and still feel pulled toward it. You can recognize the red flags, name the behaviors, even predict the outcome, and still hesitate when it's time to walk away. That hesitation is not weakness. It is conditioning. The brain does not change simply because it learns something new. It changes through repetition, through experience, through replacing old emotional associations with new ones. And when it comes to attraction, those associations run deep. For an intelligent woman, the first real shift is subtle but transformative. It is the moment she stops asking what this person means and starts asking what this dynamic is doing to her. This shift moves attention away from interpretation and back to impact, because toxic relationships thrive on interpretation. They survive in the space where behavior is constantly analyzed, reframed, and given the benefit of the doubt. But when you focus on impact, the picture becomes clearer. You begin to notice how often you feel anxious instead of calm, uncertain instead of secure, drained instead of supported, and those patterns are much harder to explain away. Psychological research on emotional regulation shows that naming internal states reduces their intensity and increases clarity of decision making. When you move from abstract thinking to direct emotional awareness, the brain shifts from a reactive state to a more grounded one. You stop chasing meaning and start recognizing reality. But there is a deeper layer to this process. Breaking the attraction to toxic individuals often requires redefining what feels familiar. Many intelligent women have spent years, sometimes unconsciously, equating emotional intensity with connection. They have learned to associate challenge with value, complexity with depth, unpredictability with excitement. These associations do not disappear overnight. They have to be replaced. This is where the concept of secure attachment becomes critical. Studies in attachment theory consistently show that individuals who develop or adopt secure relational patterns begin to experience calm, consistency, and mutual respect as emotionally fulfilling rather than boring. But this transition takes time because the nervous system has to adjust. At first, healthy connections may feel almost too simple. There is no guessing, no decoding, no emotional roller coaster. Communication is clear. Behavior is consistent. And for a mind that is used to constant stimulation, this can feel unfamiliar, even unsettling. But unfamiliar does not mean wrong. It means new. And over time, the brain begins to recalibrate. The absence of chaos starts to feel like relief instead of emptiness. Stability begins to feel like safety instead of dullness, and connection becomes something that supports you rather than something you have to earn or fix. There's also a powerful psychological principle at play here known as self-concept alignment. People are drawn to relationships that reflect how they see themselves. When an intelligent woman begins to value her own emotional well-being, her standards shift naturally. She no longer feels compelled to prove her depth by enduring difficulty. She no longer sees understanding someone as a reason to stay. Understanding and accepting become two very different things. And that distinction changes everything. Because you can understand someone's pain without allowing it to become your responsibility. You can see someone's potential without attaching your future to it. You can recognize complexity without sacrificing your clarity. This is not about becoming less empathetic. It is about becoming more discerning. The intelligence that once kept her analyzing, questioning, and trying to solve the relationship becomes the very thing that allows her to step back, observe patterns objectively, and choose differently. Not based on intensity, not based on potential, but based on consistency, respect, and emotional safety. And when that shift happens, something remarkable follows. The attraction itself begins to change because what once felt irresistible no longer feels aligned, and what once felt unfamiliar begins to feel right. In the end, this is not a story about why smart women fall for toxic men. It is a story about how intelligence, when turned inward instead of outward, becomes the most powerful tool for breaking free. Not by thinking harder about the other person, but by finally seeing yourself clearly.